Hello, BookTube. Today I've come back from my short hiatus that I take after the end of every video to talk to you about not really a book this time. It's a graphic novel. Well, it's a manga actually. This is by Osamu Tezuka and it's called Moo. At least Wikipedia tells me that it's pronounced Moo. In the book, it's spelled MW, and I think maybe it's actually called MW. I'm not sure. I decided to read this book because I had read Osamu Tezuka's other book, one of his other books called Message to Adolf, and I really liked it. So I decided to check out this one to see what it's like. Uh, Osamu Tezuka, if you don't know, is an extremely influential Japanese mangaka from operating from 60s, 70s, and he made Astro Boy and Kimball the White Lion and a bunch of very like proto anime sort of Japanese art that had a big influence on Walt Disney Company and early animation, that kind of thing. And this was written in the 70s, so this is after he was already well established as an artist and he had already made Astro Boy and all that other things. This is a much more adult book. Astro Boy is very kiddie, like child oriented. This is about a serial killer and it depicts, rape and pedophilia and all kinds of horrible things. It's it's very 70s. The 70s back when I mean, if you just have a psychosexual serial killer, there's like a 50-50 shot that it's in the 70s, and this book definitely is. Uh, it's a crime thriller, and it has a ridiculous plot, just like Message to Adolf. It is like a crime psychological thriller with a million twists and turns, and a million plot twists, and a million plot holes, and a lot of things that don't add up or don't make sense. So, what's it about? It's about wow, where to even begin with the plot? It really kind of unfolds as you read it. So it starts off like you're just being shown a couple of guys and you're like, who are they? And then you find out their backstory and then the whole story starts to really unfold before your eyes. I kind of like that. It, if I was to explain it, it would be about two men who were the last survivors of a horrible disaster caused by the government and covered up by them. And they have to keep this secret, and they've gone apart in their later years and they've grown into two very different people, but their fates cross once again. Now, this horrible disaster I've just mentioned was an island whereon there was a chemical called MW, which was stored there, and it leaked out and killed everybody in the island except for these two people because they were in a cave high up on a mountain and the wind blew the chemical away so that they could come down and see all the death and destruction and get traumatized by it. And now it was an older boy and a younger boy. And this older boy was a juvenile delinquent horrible person at that time and he raped the younger child in that cave. And and then when they go outside, this younger child, he starts to feel some of the effects of the poison, and then they make it out on a raft and leave the island just in time for him to make a recovery. But then once they return to the mainland and then they grow up, they part different ways. The young child becomes a psychotic serial killer, and the older child grows up to become a priest who's very concerned with redeeming himself for all the bad things he did. So that tells you right there what the themes of the story are. It's about good and evil. Where does evil come from? How can somebody truly redeem themselves? That kind of thing. There's a lot of questions here about yeah, this the serial killer. Did he become a serial killer because he was raped, or was it partially an effect that the moo had on him? Which is a question that the story brings up every once in a while. That it maybe changed the biology in his brain. It's all stuff that's kind of like the whole story surrounding the chemical is a little bit iffy. Like it changed the chemical in his brain, maybe. That seems a little contrived. And the fact that the government covered up this whole island full of dead people, they did that by like moving people from off the island onto the island and slowly recolonizing it with people who weren't related or knew any of the people who were on the island originally, so that the island gets recolonized and nobody there knows what happened to it before. That just seems like massive. Like, I don't even think North Korea could do that. Like that, if something like this happens, you need a cover story. You need to say like, yeah, all the people died, but it was because of this and not that. And Osamu Tezuka's explanation is just kind of crazy. And a lot of things like that interrupt this plot of this and Message to Adolf. Just things that kind of don't add up, kind of don't make sense. But personally, I kind of like that in these stories. I sort of like, I don't always care about the story making total sense because this plot moves forward really fast and I like the characters and I like all the things that happen. I mean, I don't like the characters as people. I just like what they do in the story and how they are. And it's all very interesting to me. And if he wants to be melodramatic, I kind of like that. I personally I enjoy that. But for a lot of people, it'll probably get in the way. Now, where was I? Oh yeah. Well, after after these two split apart, they end up meeting up again, and it turns out that they have a strange relationship with each other. This young child, or the younger one and the older one, this younger one's constantly seducing this older one into a homosexual relationship, and it's a bit the whole homosexuality aspect is a bit strangely done in this book. One aspect of it is that the killer is by profession, he's a kabuki actor. His brother was a kabuki actor, and they play female roles in kabuki theater. So he's characterized as being very feminine, very effete, and you can tell by the way he's drawn in a lot of these scenes. He's like clearly he's somewhat androgynous. Mm, and the priest, he often they end up having sex. They have sex several times throughout this book, and often the priest mentioned at least once that he turns into a female in order to have sex with him. And when I first read that, I thought he was saying that he was intersex, like he's a hermaphrodite or something, and he has vagina, but the story never brings that up again. So I don't know if that's just him saying that he seems feminine or if that's something that the book's saying about the killer's body. I don't remember anybody's name, so I'm just gonna call him the priest and the killer from now on. And yeah, that's a strange relationship. Him being a priest and all, he's very ashamed of it. He's constantly trying to redeem himself for that. I mean, no, homosexuality in the 70s in Japan, I don't know what people really thought of it back then. It's kind of hard to get a grapple on what Japan thinks of homosexuality now. For me personally, I'm not quite sure because they seem to I seem to see it represented a lot there, but I'm not sure if they're very for it or if they're just kind of think it's cool. I have no idea. And it's kind of hard to determine in this story. I mean, I think it's supposed to be a point against the priest that he's a homosexual, that he's unable to, it's going to make him harder for him to redeem himself, but I think it's also supposed to not be considered unredeemable. Whereas the psychosexual serial killer who has sex with and then kills tons of people in this book, that is unredeemable, of course. Now, there's so after they escape this island and, years have passed, this killer, he's killed people, and suddenly he gets a desire to go back to the island and to find the Moo again. And he manipulates the priest into helping him. And I'm not quite sure why this priest came along, to be honest, but they go on this adventure and they go to the island and uh, like government agents try to track them down, and it's all very crazy. And it turns out that he actually wants to steal the Mu and then use it. He wants to spread it all over Japan or all over the world, he amends himself. He wants to kill everybody, everybody. And he's asked multiple times, why do you want to do this? Why do you want to kill everybody? And he always says, no reason. I just want to. It's, that's a little on the nose, don't you think? I mean, I like this. I guess I like this interpretation. I like this. What's the word? Like presentation. Just this presentation of evil, where he's totally senseless. He has no reason to do any of the things he does. Maybe he does have a reason. Maybe it is revenge, which he denies throughout the book. But maybe he's so evil that he just doesn't even realize his own thoughts. I kind of, I'm kind of interested by that a little bit. But I guess he just feels like killing everybody. And this priest is sort of has been manipulated by him to help him on this journey, and partially because they have this weird homosexual relationship, and he's also probably trying to work through stuff with this traumatic island experience too. So yeah, they work together, and they work together. Although, of course, at the end of the story, the priest, not to give too much away, but he sacrifices himself to stop the move from getting out, and that's a tearful conclusion wherein he redeems himself. The killer back on the killer sees him sacrifice himself and he cries, showing his humanity, showing that he actually did love this priest probably. He wasn't just trying to manipulate him the whole book or just try to get sex from him, like in revenge for yeah, that's another thing about the homosexuality. Is it saying that this Kabuki killer is homosexual because he was raped as a child, or is it not? It's all a little confusing. There's actually one other thing depiction of homosexuality in this book, this which is interesting. They mention that several times about how America is very accepting of homosexuals. There's one plot thread in the story that goes absolutely nowhere where the killer accidentally captures a photograph of the priest with another man and tries to leak it to the press to destroy him, but that doesn't go anywhere because the woman that okay, well look at this man. This is the guy trying to leak the photographs. He's the most 70s looking person I've ever seen. This woman also looks fairly 70s, and she's the newspaper person that he's trying to leak them to. She's an American. He's also an American, I think. And she decides to not run the story, and he's angry about that. But later he gets later she gets visited by the father, and he asks her, why aren't you going to run the story? Are you aren't you going to run the story? And she says, no, of course not. In America, everybody's accepting of homosexuality. Some states are even trying to legalize it. And he's so thankful, and he looks out the window and he looks at the stars and he thanks God that he has been saved. And that's a moment that kind of makes you wonder, like, is this pro or anti? And then I'm gonna show this on YouTube. It's been 13 minutes. Maybe YouTube won't even notice. You see this panel. He's like, thank God, thank God. And then, darling, I'm home. You won't realize the good deed I did today. It just shows them in bed. Her in bed with her girlfriend. Like, what does that mean? Like, is that supposed to be like a scary reveal? Like, done. Like, I don't know what's going on there. I find that kind of funny, unintentionally funny, honestly. You know, so you can see the art style is pretty nice. I like the way it's drawn. I mean, this classic like manga style that's slightly cartoony but also fairly realistic. I like it. It's clearly very well drawn. A lot of graphic novels these days, they have this tendency, this huge trend to like all after Persepolis came out, I think. Now they all have to look really cartoony, sometimes even childish in nature. And I just think that looks I'm bored of that after a certain point. I like this style better, honestly. And talking about the art style, Osamu Tezuka actually did this really interesting thing, which he called the star system, where some of the characters from some books will come back in later books with a different name and a different personality and a different character and all that. They're just clearly like the same character design, the same drawing. And he would refer to them like they were movie actors. Now, this is a bit awkward and weird sometimes because you'll have a character from Astro Boy or something, this like absolute cartoon of a design, and he's showing up in this book about the psychosexual serial killers, or in Message to Adolf, like one of the top Nazi like enemies in the book is a villain from Astro Boy that has like giant glasses and looks really funny and weird. It is kind of strange. There's only one instance of that in this book. It's this guy with the crazy mustache. And this is actually a scene where he gets his dick bitten off by this dog. And I just thought I'd bring that up. Message to Adolf actually had the same problem too. There's where sometimes it's just a bit too cartoony. At one point of the book, there's actually a part where one of the Nazi characters is like surprised to hear something, so like his hat like flies off the top of his head. It's literally like the Nazi cap with like the little star insignia and like the Iron Cross on it, and it's like like off his head like that. That's funny. That's funny. It doesn't quite match the tone, but it's funny. Yeah. Is there anything else to talk about here? One more point about the art style. At one point in this book, I just want to bring this up, even though I know I'm rambling a bit. At one point, there's the two characters are having sex, and I'm not going to show anything graphic here, but it's artfully depicted, and these are Aubrey Beardsley paintings here. Aubrey Beardsley woodcuts that are being used to represent the sex. This is Salome here, his famous painting, and there's some other ones. Woodcut. It's not a painting; it's a woodcut. But I just think that's really interesting to bring up. I want to bring that up. So there's a million. Yeah. So just to recap about this book, there's a million twists a minute. Psychological thriller, very fast-paced story. Lots of sort of blunt questions about good and evil and right and wrong. Very sort of on the nose with everything. A little questionable in some aspects, but at the same time, it feels like even though some of these aspects are really questionable, Osamu Tezuka, you can really tell he cares about humanity and he has a lot of love for humanity and good and evil, but he's also somebody that struggles with understanding the nature of the two. And I think that comes out really well here. And Message to Adolf, that's that moral grayness also comes across, except for one part where like a main character rapes somebody else, rapes a woman, and I'm not sure what you're supposed to feel about that. So that's a huge problem with Message to Adolf. But we're talking about Moo here, and that moral grayness comes through. I like stories with a lot of moral ambiguity like that. Well, moral ambiguity, but at the end there's still a clear cut answer. You know, it's hard for me to explain. It's like the whole story. There's a lot of moral questions, but then at the end it's clear who's probably better than everybody else. And this is a case of one of those. Yeah, I feel like that's about all I have to say about it. If you, well, who would like this story? I think people that are really into thrillers, like Alfred Hitchcock style thrillers, where all these with all this action and all these tense moments and scenes, I think they would really like that. I read this book in like 2 days, honestly. I read like 40 pages the first day, and then the next day I read the rest of the 600 pages. I couldn't put it down. So for that alone, I think that it's great. I really enjoyed it. If that sounds like the kind of thing you like, please give it a go. I'd say try it out and try Message Stay Off too. Although I will warn you about that one. That is a little bit more dangerous. You have to be prepared for that scene where one of the main characters rapes somebody, rapes a woman. Yeah, I mean that alone. should probably that alone really sullies the rest of the story. But there are three main characters in that, so you can kind of ignore that one main character. I don't know. I don't know. This one's a little better though. Anyway, see you later, BookTube.